Money Can't Buy Happiness is the new album from London-based rapper, singer and songwriter Fredo. The last 5 or so years have been a steady rise to the top for Fredo, between getting the coveted co-sign from Drake and also getting a #1 single with Freaky Friday with Dave a few years back. I myself am relatively new to Fredo's music in all honesty, but from the little music that I've heard of his prior to this album, I can say that I was both surprised as well as impressed. Surprised in the sense that, to me, Fredo sounds like he belongs to a different era. He has far more in common with the road rap pioneers of 10 or so years ago, like Giggs, like Sneakbo, like even Young's Teflon, rather than sounding like any of his contemporaries. I wouldn't have necessarily expected someone who sounds so little like his peers to be making so many waves that Fredo is, but here we are. What's important, however, is he is still bringing something new to this tried and tested formula, and that's very clear to see on this new project. He hasn't necessarily got the swagger on a track that someone like J Hus has, or the wordplay that someone like Unknown T has, but what he does have is 100% rawness and self-awareness in his writing. That particular aspect of his songwriting, I think, is kind of hard to come by, especially in this kind of niche, but I think that is what the appeal is towards Fredo and why he is making so many waves. Enlisting Dave to come on and be an executive producer on this album, I think, was an inspired move on Fredo's part. And I think that's because that cohesion and dramatic edge that Dave usually has in his music is apparent in this album as well. Biggest Mistake opens up the album in dramatic fashion with its sparse, almost bare bones, piano-driven beat, with a sprinkling of some sliding 808s. It does a perfect job at introducing audiences to who Fredo is and why he is the person he is, and importantly, where he has come from. He even details being in prison with Dave's older brother, who's in prison for a substantial amount of time, before coincidentally going on to have a #1 single with Dave himself. Perspective is the main thing that I think Fredo brings on this track. It provides a perfect window into his mind, and it also lays the core themes down for the rest of the album. I think that having a clear theme and a running narrative throughout this project is maybe Dave's biggest contribution to this album, and I think that is probably the main reason Fredo brought him in. That continues into the next track, which is Back to Basics, which is produced by Dave himself. Like so many of these songs, it's characterized by a ghostly, ethereal vocal sample over a spacey, bare bones beat. It most definitely fits the title of this track because Fredo spends the majority of this track detailing his life at a simpler time back in the hood. He explains his mindset, what he was thinking at that time before he has got to this point where he is now, where he feels like he's made it, but he always keeps that sense of overarching perspective at the very forefront. At one point on the song, he says, "You think I read comments, I'm a bad boy with street knowledge," which I think is a perfectly concise way of reminding Fredo's audience that there's such a big disparity between what happens in the online realm and what happens in real life. This album's consistency and its sonic cohesion is both its biggest strength and I think its biggest weakness, because I feel when you get further down the album, you can hear Fredo at times starting to run out of ideas. Ready starts promisingly with an instantly recognizable Enya sample, but nothing particularly interesting is done to incorporate or flip the sample in any way. Fredo continues to detail his harsh, brutal upbringing and his background on this track, and it turns out being one of the more open and honest moments on the album. What brings this song down for me, however, is the Summer Walker feature. Her hook is sterile beyond imagination, and her verse is just generic as hell. It just feels very out of place, for me at least, and I kind of get the sense that this feature was tacked on at the last minute just to try and appeal to a wider American audience. Another American that makes an appearance is Pop Smoke, with a posthumous feature on the song Burner on Deck. He gets a short little mini verse and a couple of lines on the hook with young ads, but I think it's clear as day that this is an unfinished idea. Not too dissimilar to his feature on the Kid Cudi album with Skepta a couple of months ago, and it's through no fault of Pop Smoke's, of course, but it just sounds like this little idea that he had was just stretched out into a full feature. The beat is maybe the highlight of the song for me, and Young Adz provides a surprisingly strong feature, but when you get towards the last 30, 45 seconds of the song, you get this strange, completely out of place, dramatic piano piece. The beat is perfectly fine as it is, and I think that's one of the rare examples on this album of trying to overproduce a beat. Money Talks teams up Fredo and Dave once again, and like a lot of the instrumentals on this album, it's ghostly, it's bare bones, and it's very sparse. At times in some of the verses, it's just the vocal sample and the percussion, and that's it. Fredo drops a few clever one-liners as Dave delivers his usual punchline and wordplay heavy bars. The straightforward, simple approach to this song is, for me, its strongest asset, and unlike Burner on Deck, the piano outro fits perfectly on this song. Do You Right is where Fredo seems to do his best Young Adz impression, and I think it's very easy to hear that this is not a sound that Fredo sounds particularly comfortable in. Lyrically, it's the one blip, the one moment on the album where Fredo sounds uninteresting and the whole thing is just dedicated to generic trapping bars. Thankfully, this is an anomaly, and we end the album on a high with two of the strongest tracks on the entire project. Aunt's Place details Fredo's regret at his behavior as a youth, as well as detailing his harsh experiences in prison. It's cold and it's brutal, but it's an all too familiar tale of being reeled into this world where you feel like you can't get out, and Fredo just happens to be one of the lucky ones to make it on the other side. Fredo rapping over these bare bones, sparse, simple beats with him being open and honest and vulnerable is where he's at his strongest. Every song that follows this formula on this album is one of the best tunes. Fredo saved the best song for last with the song What Can I Say? And I think he has dropped one of the most emotionally driven and kind of heartbreaking songs that you're likely to hear all year. He dedicates this song to two of his close friends who passed away in the last year. And what he does so well in this song is he details the real human cost that comes along with leading this lifestyle. He opens up about his grieving process and how he wishes he had done things differently. And I think bringing that aspect is so important when you choose to rap about the things that Fredo raps about. If you're going to choose to rap about being a trapper or being a gangster, then you can't really skate around the risk involved with leading that lifestyle. And Fredo doesn't tiptoe around this issue at all. He does it so simply and honestly on this song that you can't help but hang on to every single word that he says. I'm actually very glad that this is the last song on the album, because for me it brings everything, every theme that he's laid out in this album full circle. All those mistakes on Biggest Mistakes on the opening song that he details lead to the events of this song. Those events coming full circle is kind of like the vicious cycle that is gang violence today. Money Can't Buy Happiness is far from a perfect album, but I think it leaves Fredo with a lot of room to grow his sound, but it has laid the groundwork for him to make this open, raw, emotional road rap completely his own. Those are my thoughts on the album. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Make sure to like, subscribe, and dong the bell, and I shall see you next time.